The gun is already on the desk when she walks in. She has not touched it. Neither has he. It sits between them like a third person in the room, patient and certain, catching the pale light that bleeds in through the rain-slicked windows. The city is 40 floors below, and it might as well be another world. Up here there is only the rain and the silence, and Dante Moretti watching her from behind his desk with those dark, unreadable eyes, and the absolute stillness of a man who has already made his decision and is simply waiting for her to make hers. She is trembling. She knows it. She can feel it in her hands, in the small muscles of her jaw, in the breath she keeps pulling in and not quite releasing. But she does not step back. She has not come this far to step back. He slides the gun toward her, slowly, deliberately, the way a chess player moves a piece they have been planning to move for a long time. "Choose," he says. And in that moment, standing in the ruins of everything she thought she knew about him, about herself, about why she came here, she understands that she does not know which one of them is truly in danger. Before I take you deeper into this story, I want to ask you something. Where are you listening from tonight? Are you alone, or is someone sitting close enough to hear? Because this one is the kind of story that changes the air in the room. If stories like this pull at something inside you, the kind where love arrives wearing the wrong face, go ahead and subscribe to Morvyn Tales. Because if you don't, by the time this ends, you might owe me a favor you won't want to give. Now let me take you back, all the way back, to where this began. Every morning for 2 years, Amara Bello sent the same text message before she left her apartment. "I'm okay." She sent it to her brother's number, a number that had been disconnected for 22 months. She knew the message went nowhere. That was not the point. The point was the sending of it. The small, daily insistence that she was still here, still upright, still moving through a world that had taken the one person in it who had always believed she would be fine. She was 24 years old, and she was not fine. She was drowning in a debt her brother had left behind, working temp jobs that barely covered rent, living in a studio apartment where the heating came on only sometimes, and the window above the kitchen sink had a crack she'd filled with electrical tape. She had a postgraduate degree in business administration hanging on the wall above the crack. She had not found a use for it yet. Her brother Kofi had been 26 when he died. The police report used the phrase gang-related incident, which was the police's way of saying, we are not going to look very hard at this. There were no witnesses, no arrests, no answers, just a closed case file and a grief that Amara carried the way you carry something that is fused to your ribs and can no longer be separated from breathing. She did not talk about it. She talked around it, past it, over it. She smiled at the right moments and said she was doing okay. And she went to work every morning and sent her text message and kept moving, because stopping felt like something she might not survive. But underneath all of that stillness, something had been building, something with teeth. Then the call came. A man named Reyes. He said he had information about Kofi's death. He said he had a job for her, a real job, the kind that would clear her debt and give her a future, and if she was willing to do what was necessary, finally give her the truth. He said the name of the man responsible. He said Dante Moretti, and he said, we need someone on the inside. Amara did not say yes immediately. She sat with it for 3 days. She reread the police report. She stood in front of Kofi's photograph on her shelf, the one where he was laughing at something just outside the frame, and she thought about what he would say. She thought he would probably tell her not to do it. And then she thought that he was not here to tell her anything, and that was exactly why she was going to. She said yes. Dante Moretti was not a man you read about in newspapers, at least not in any article that told the truth. His name appeared in business columns, in charity galas, in the guest lists of the kind of events where old money met new power and neither one asked the other too many questions. He was described as an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, a visionary in urban development. What he actually was. the operating mind behind a syndicate that controlled the city's port imports, 3 separate logistics networks, a constellation of real estate fronts, and enough political relationships to make certain kinds of problems disappear before they became problems. He was 34 years old, and he had built all of it from something his father had started and he had finished, or rather had remade entirely in his own image. Colder, more precise, more difficult to touch. Everyone who worked close to him said the same thing eventually. He notices everything. There was no version of being in a room with Dante Moretti where you were not being read. Amara walked into her interview with a fabricated resume, a cover story she had rehearsed until it felt like memory, and hands she had to concentrate to keep still. He was late. That was the first thing. 12 people waited in the executive suite, assistants and interviewers arranged in careful positions, and when the door opened, they all rose at once, the way people rise when they are not told to, but understand that they must. He did not greet anyone. He walked through the room with the particular kind of authority that does not need to be performed because it has been earned. And then his gaze moved across the space and landed on Amara, and it stayed. Not long enough to be remarkable. Long enough for her to feel it. The interview lasted 22 minutes. He asked her questions she knew he already had the answers to, questions any competent hiring assistant would have verified before she walked through the door. She answered them smoothly. She had rehearsed this. She was calm. She was professional. She was lying through every polished word, and her hands were steady, and she was almost proud of herself. Then she made a mistake. He asked about her familiarity with import logistics, a question that fit her cover story, and she answered a fraction too specifically. She referenced a coordination gap in the harborside scheduling that she had no legitimate way of knowing about. It came out before she caught it, one sentence, half a detail, but it sat in the air between them, and she watched him notice it the way you watch someone pick up a key they weren't meant to find. A pause, the particular quality of his silence, then, "You'll start tomorrow." She did not understand why he hired her, not then. For the first week she was careful. She filed, she organized, she learned the architecture of his days. He worked long hours and he worked quietly. And he had the habit of standing at the window in the late afternoon with a glass of water and looking at the city the way someone looks at something they are responsible for. She watched him when she could, without being obvious about it, cataloging the data she had been sent to collect, and she told herself that was all it was, data collection. Then Reyes called. She took the call in a bathroom on a lower floor, both taps running. He had more information, he said, about Kofi. Her brother had owed money, a debt to someone connected to the syndicate, and when he couldn't pay, the order had been made. The name on the order, Reyes told her, traced back to Dante Moretti's organization. "Stay close," Reyes said. "Get deeper. Find the financial records. Do what you came to do." And then he said something else. He said he had Kofi's personal effects, items recovered from the scene that the police had held and then released to someone who hadn't been Amara. He had them. He would give them to her, he said, when she delivered what they needed. She stood with both hands on the sink after she hung up and looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. Her brother's things. She had not let herself think about what had been taken from the scene. She had spent 22 months not thinking about it, because thinking about it meant confronting the particular helplessness of someone who had been shut out of even her own grief. She went back upstairs. She committed fully, but something was already shifting. It was small at first, the way he spoke to the cleaning staff by name, the way he read reports with a pen in his hand and actually used it, marking questions in the margins rather than simply signing off. The way once she had stayed late to finish a filing that wasn't her responsibility, and he had passed the open door of the archive room and paused and said only, "Go home, Miss Bello. The building will be here tomorrow." She went home. She lay awake thinking about his voice. She hated herself a little for it. Then came the night that changed everything. She had been working late again, genuinely this time, cross-referencing import manifests for a presentation he needed by morning. She was alone in the outer office when she heard voices through the conference room door. Not raised voices. Careful ones, which somehow made them easier to hear than shouting. Two men she recognized as senior members of Dante's inner circle. And they were discussing the order. Her brother's name was not used, but the details mapped exactly. And the name they said, the one who had originated the order and then buried it under Dante's signature, was not Dante's name. It was a man named Cavalcante, his operations director. A man who had been with the syndicate for 15 years and who had, it appeared, been quietly redirecting certain decisions through channels that made them look like they came from the top, when they had never passed through the top at all. Amara sat very still at her desk after the voices faded. She put both hands flat on the cool surface of the keyboard and breathed the way she had taught herself to breathe when the thing happening was too large to respond to immediately. She did not cry. She thought about Reyes. She thought about what he had told her and what he had not. She thought about the files she had been directed to find and who those files would benefit if she found them, and whether Reyes was after justice at all or whether he was after something else entirely. She went home. She texted Kofi's number. She did not write, "I'm okay." She didn't know what she was anymore. The next weeks were the most dangerous and the most disorienting of her life. Someone began following her. A car that appeared too consistently at the edges of her commute. Reyes pushed harder, his messages sharper, his patience fraying into something that felt like a threat. A rival faction made a move against two of Dante's port operations, and suddenly the office ran on 4 hours of sleep and everyone inside it was being watched by everyone else. And then there was the public humiliation, a meeting, senior staff and 2 outside partners, a discrepancy in a report she had prepared, small and explainable, but Dante named it in front of everyone with a precision that stripped her bare. She stood and absorbed it. She kept her face composed. She did not flinch. And she told herself it was a test, because the alternative, that he was simply capable of treating people this way, was something she was no longer sure she believed. She found out later, through a source she'd cultivated carefully, that the discrepancy had been introduced into her work by someone else, that the meeting had been a controlled exposure, that Dante had been watching to see how she responded under pressure. She was still processing that when the van appeared. A man from Reyes's network had pushed the contact too far, made a physical approach in a parking structure that was not sanctioned and not safe, and Amara had been in the wrong place and suddenly in genuine danger when Dante's security detail materialized from 3 directions, and it was over in under a minute. He did not explain it to her. He said nothing. He walked her to his car and drove in silence and left her at her building without asking for anything. She stood on the pavement and watched his car disappear and felt the ground shift under something she had been trying very hard to call a mission. Now let me ask you something, because I think you already know what she was feeling, and I think you also know it terrified her. Do you think she would have stopped, even then, if she had known what he was about to tell her? He had known since the first interview. She found this out not from him, not at first, but from a document she was never supposed to see. A personnel file with her real name on it, her real history. A note in his handwriting in the margin that gave a date, which was the same date as her interview, and a single word, confirmed. He had run her before she walked through the door. She went to him directly. She did not deliberate. She walked into his office on a Thursday morning with the file in her hand, and she set it on his desk, and she waited. He looked at it, then he looked at her. "Sit down," he said. She did not sit down. He told her then, all of it. He had known she was planted. He had known from the phrasing of her initial approach through the employment agency, a detail that carried a specific fingerprint he had seen before, because Reyes had tried this before with someone else, years ago, when Dante had first started pulling at the thread that led to Cavalcante. He had let her stay, not to trap her, but because her presence confirmed what he had suspected, that whoever sent her was scared enough to move, which meant he was close enough to the truth to push. The same person who had ordered Kofi's death had, 7 years earlier, betrayed Dante in a way that had cost him something he never named directly, but that she could see in the particular flatness of his voice when he referred to it. They were not standing on opposite sides of a war. They were both standing inside the same one. She listened. She stood very still, and she listened, and when he finished, she said nothing for what felt like a very long time. Then she spoke. "You don't get to play God with people's lives and call it strategy." Her voice was low. It did not shake. "I came here to destroy you. I want you to understand that. I wanted to watch you lose everything. I built the plan, I rehearsed the lies, I sat across from you and smiled, and I genuinely believed, that what I was doing was the only form of justice my brother was ever going to get." She stopped, started again. "But somewhere along the way, you stopped being the villain in my story, and I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to be angry at someone who turns out to be something other than what I needed them to be. And that is the part," she said, "that I don't know how to forgive." She reached into her bag and placed a flash drive on the desk. The evidence, Cavalcante's name, his methods, his communications, the trail she had spent weeks quietly and furiously building when she understood who the real target was. She waited for him to reach for it. He didn't. He looked at her instead. For a long time, in the rain-heavy silence of that office, he simply looked at her. And for the first time since she had walked into his world, she felt him not as a force to be navigated, but as a person who was carrying something heavy, and had been carrying it alone for a very long time. "I never wanted you in this war," he said. His voice was quiet. Not soft, not gentle, but stripped of the performance. The layer he wore for everyone else was simply gone. And she understood then that he had kept her close not to use her, though perhaps he had told himself that was the reason, but because something about her presence had loosened something in him that had been held tight for years, because she was the only person in that building who had looked at him without wanting something, even if what she had actually wanted was to destroy him. There was an honesty in that, a terrible, almost funny honesty that neither of them had words for. She picked the gun up from the desk. She looked at it. She set it down on his side, out of reach of either of them. "Then let's finish the war," she said. What happened next did not look like victory. It rarely does. Dante made a decision that cost him, and he made it deliberately and without hesitation. He contacted 3 of his longest-standing political allies and handed them Cavalcante's file. In doing so, he exposed the edges of his own operations. He sacrificed leverage. He reduced his own reach, deliberately, in order to ensure that the evidence against Cavalcante could not be buried the way Kofi's case had been buried. He did this without being asked. Cavalcante was arrested on a Thursday. By Friday, his network had been dismantled. By Saturday, Amara had a phone call from someone at the department who told her that her brother's case was being reopened under new information, that there were answers coming, finally and irreversibly coming. She sat on the floor of her apartment and cried for the first time since the night Kofi died. Not quietly, fully. The kind of crying that sounds like it's going to break something but doesn't, because the thing it releases is more than it takes. She texted her brother's number that night. "I found them," she wrote. "The people responsible. I found them." She did not pretend the message went anywhere. She knew it went nowhere. But she sent it because the sending of it mattered, and because she had promised herself that when this day came, she would not let it pass without telling him. 3 weeks later, she stood beside Dante on the rooftop of a building she had learned to navigate in the dark, The city spread out below them in its usual electric indifference. He was not the same man he had been. He was smaller, in a sense, with less empire behind him, fewer people owed to him and owing. And he was more present than she had ever seen him, more visibly himself, the way people become when they stop maintaining something enormous. She was not behind his desk. She was not under his authority. She was beside him as an equal, in the only way that word had ever meant anything to her. Chosen, not assigned. She had not forgiven everything. She was not sure forgiveness was the right word for what this was. What it was an understanding. Two people who had been pointed at each other by someone else's cruelty, who had found, in the middle of all that wreckage, something neither of them had been looking for and neither of them was willing to walk away from. She had still texted that morning. "I'm okay," she wrote. And for the first time, it was simply true. Some stories aren't about love at first sight. They're about learning who the enemy really is, and finding out that the answer is stranger and more complicated and more human than you were prepared for. And sometimes the most dangerous man in your life isn't the one who destroys you, but the one who changes you by refusing to be what you needed him to be. If this story made you feel something, if it stayed with you even a little, subscribe to Morvyn Tales. Because if you don't, you might just find yourself rooting for the wrong person next time. And remember, the night always looks different when you finally know who's holding the gun. She had known it was different from the moment she stopped wanting to be the one holding it.